I have a little bit of a hot take. I actually think everyone thinks AI product management is sexy. I actually argue it's probably one of the more unsexy roles these days. So what I mean by that is like you actually will spend a majority of your time just evaluating AI outputs. I guess there's like the AI Evals. It's like a really popular skill that's coming up. For example, when we were building our AI Power-Ups product, which is our research agent, I would spend at least maybe 2 to 5 hours a week, literally just reviewing spreadsheets of what our machine learning team and prompt writers were basically writing, where it's like, okay, here's a company, here's like the research we want to conduct to find pain points that they're solving, and like, does this look good or not? And that doesn't work when you just do it on like one company. You need to do it on like 50 to 100 companies.
Hey, what's up, everybody? We're joined today by Tyler from Apollo. I'm going to let him tell you more about himself and what he's up to. So, Tyler, thanks for joining the show and welcome. I'm excited to chat. But yeah, maybe you just get started. Give us an overview of just like, who are you? What are you working on? What's Apollo for anybody who's not familiar? And then we'll go deeper from there.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show, Ian. I'm the AI product lead for Apollo. Apollo is like a sales platform backed by like Sequoia, Bain Capital, and YC. I pretty much lead all of our AI efforts at Apollo for our AI platform and our Apollo AI assistant. For those that people don't know Apollo, essentially we're an end-to-end sales engagement platform. We help companies find, engage, and then convert their prospects. So we go all the way from like prospecting all the way down to closing deals. So that's kind of generally what Apollo does. I believe Free Play is a customer of Apollo.
We have been. Yep. This is just coincidence. We know each other from the community. It's not because we're a customer, but we're proud to be a customer, happy to be a customer. And yeah, our sales and marketing folks make good use of it. So it's awesome.
Yeah. And then I guess for like maybe a little bit more about like what we do for Apollo AI to set the context. So for Apollo AI, we're really focused on finding the right person to reach out to and then sending the right message at the right time. And then once you book that meeting, it's really preparing for the meeting, analyzing the meeting, and then figure out the next steps. And then obviously eventually to like executing to closing the deal. So that's generally what we focus on from AI perspective.
Yeah, and maybe like I'll ask you to go a little deeper there. I think you know this. A lot of people that listen to this are product and engineering folks. I'm excited to be talking today because like you're on the product side. Often we have engineering leaders. We'll talk about AI product management at some point, but many of the people listening to this are not running a sales motion with the majority of their day. I think a lot of people are probably like used to getting personalized email inbound from sellers that they've never met before, right? And like maybe that's the extent of what they know about generative AI and sales. So if like just help us anchor as we have the conversation. Take us a little deeper. You just kind of talked about like different stages in the sales process, but tell us about the like actual AI products and features you've been building. Like what's happening in each of those stages? How does AI come in and just like make for a better customer experience for Apollo's customers?
Totally. So if you think about like when you're building out, first you're trying to find customers to like an outbound sales motion. That's primarily what Apollo focuses on. Similar to when you're building a company or like a startup, you're always looking for people to reach out to, either to conduct interviews, in our case, to book meetings. So like the first step for AI for us is really about lead search and then prioritization. So for lead search, we basically have like lookalikes where you can identify similar companies to like people you've already sold to, kind of similar to like recommendations, like say within Amazon. Second would be like, okay, well, let's say I have a list of 100 people I want to reach out to. Like there's not infinite time in the day, so then it's like, okay, well, how can Apollo help you prioritize who to reach out to? So that's our auto scoring models, where we basically score each of the leads that you have based off your ideal customer profile, as well as behavioral signals, like did they visit your website or stuff like that. That is an ML, traditionally an ML machine learning model that we use based off of who we reach out to. And then after that, we have AI for research. So that's our AI Power-Ups product, which we'll probably dive into a little bit later, to help you kind of gather a bunch of information about this person as well as this company to decide, okay, is this the right person for my that has a unique need for my product? And then what should I say to them? After that, once you do book a meeting, It's like, okay, well, now I want to prepare for the meeting. Maybe you'll go, let's say in ChatGPT to write something up. So we have something for that to prepare for the meeting. And then when you have a conversation like we're having right now, we have a tool that will basically analyze your conversation to then tell you, okay, here are the next steps. Here are the things you could have done better. Here are the objections that they had. So you can kind of improve your sales process and then eventually, close deals and then kind of reach your sales goals. So that's kind of a high level of like how AI. So we have a mix between like LLMs, machine learning models within our product. Yeah,
And it sounds like, the lookalike kind of recommendation type stuff, more traditional machine learning. As you get further in the process, you're getting more into like some of the generative stuff. Um, and kind of hitting everything from like how do you find the customer to like how do you improve and become a better seller. Um,
exactly.
so I mean that's cool. So thanks for the lay of the land. I think good for people to just know what you're building. Um, you mentioned like an assistant. I know we've talked a little bit about like an agent like in the past. Like how does this show up in the product today? Are these like embedded features in the app? Are you, building like an assistant that's doing everything for you? Tell us a little bit more about what's the product experience.
Yeah. So so for the last year, I think we kind of took the approach of like many enterprises, which is okay. Like for specific use cases, we're going to build AI features at that like in the embedded in that workflow. So like I mentioned, like lookalikes would be when you're filtering, or for conversations it'd be like when you're after a call, you can go to our conversational insights product. And I think we can get into more like the kind of where I think the market is going. But I think in general, I think the real value that's going to start to get unlocked is like how do you connect like as a as in your day to day, it's not like you just have like one human doing one thing all the time. They're doing many things. And I think for an AI, like originally it's okay, let's nail individual tasks. And at this point, it's okay, well, like how can we thread a bunch of things together? And how can it become more intelligent by knowing everything about you and your context of your, in our case, our sales workflow, versus just like individual point solutions, which I think is kind of like the first wave. So kind of seeing like the second wave, and agents is one implementation of that, but it's not even mean that like everything needs to be an agent.
Yeah. What's tell us more like how do you think about it? What's the nuance? What's when is an agent as a solution? Maybe it's even worth describing like when you say that, what do you mean? Because I think there are a lot of different definitions people these days. And then like what's an alternative when you're like saying like, hey, we want to get a bunch of things done for somebody and solve a problem, but it's not an agentic use case, there's a better solution. How do you think about those two things?
Yeah. So I mean, I think okay, so I think like agents is an abused word in the market today. And I really think like, okay, so I'll just give you like an example. So like as a product builder, like you naturally always want to gravitate towards the most like cutting edge technology. But for example, for running like an outbound, like a lot of these AI SDR companies have come out. They're like, oh, we'll just automate your entire outbound from like find leads, researching them, writing the email, then engaging with them. So you just
Yeah.
have like meetings booked on your calendar, which sounds great in concept. And I think, and if you really break down each of those problems, like it's actually more of a workflow than an agent. So I define a workflow as like you just have like a step by step, maybe like logic within each step to
Yeah.
complete some like a job to be done. And like with the workflow described, it can be solved with a workflow where you just have LLMs that you call at each step, or like machine learning models. And then it basically will go from like here's my list, write an email for everyone in this list, and then engage with them and stuff like that.
Yep.
So that's like the like in we were when we were first originally considering like the AI SDR concept, like my first instinct at that time was move just directly to an agent, but it actually didn't really make sense because if you think about like the decision making process, if you can solve it with a deterministic workflow, why would you not? Because actually like agents are not best suited for deterministic workflows.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we thought about the SDR. And of course, as things evolve, and you'll start to think more about agents. We can talk about, yeah.
Got it. Cool. And so you're using agent to mean like kind of the alternative to a more deterministic workflow. It's like, more of a self-directed model directed flow.
Yeah. I think Anthropic has a pretty good article on this where we have like, you have just traditional workflows and you have like AI powered workflows and then you have agents.
Yep. It's helpful to define it because I will just say like, even on this show, we've, talked to some people and they'll be like, I just, an agent's just a multi-step, tool calling process. It's not complicated, right? So people do mean different things these days, but cool. So good to level set. You did mention something in there about this idea of like an AI SDR. I mentioned it before, right? Like I get these emails that I feel like are obviously written by an AI system sometimes. Um, you know, there's a bunch of tweets or stuff on LinkedIn about like when there are these horrible failures from AI outreach where someone just totally fails at personalization. Um, like give us the bull case. I'd love for you to like help us understand what's the vision, like what about what you're building is just like good for the world, good for sales team, for people that are listening and they're like, that's all that I experience of AI sales. What's the bigger vision and why this is like going to be awesome?
Okay, so I mean, yeah, I think everyone has received an email like, dear Tyler, hope this email finds you well, which is kind of a joke. I don't really believe in like automate everything and that whole concept of like everything should be automated for a given function. I think like in general, like if you think about at least for the sales use case, like maybe different from like a support or coding use case, you do need to stand out, and standing out is not good with AI. And so I think the strategy that we're employing is like the winning companies, the companies that have AI that can augment humans. So AI plus human is better than either full automation or just full human. So I think that's kind of our general strategy. And like, why do I think it would be better for, I guess at least for our users as well as end users? For our users, like a lot of people are not interested in doing outbound. Sure, many people in this call like the idea of doing a sales process sounds awful. Um, and I think like what we're trying to build is like where we can have this AI product for go-to-market teams or founder or small startups that we basically can abstract the complexity of go-to-market out of the way for like doing things like finding leads to deliverability sequences, and you can just focus on okay, like I have an idea that I want to execute to like reach out to customers, and like I can use Apollo to do that, so I can unlock my creativity, but at the same time we can like imbue go-to-market best practices. Um, so it's like kind of the overall vision in terms of like a real example. So like an example, like we worked with this company called Smartling, which is an AI translation company, and their original like outbound was like, I notice you, I see you, or you're Irish, I see you like Guinness or something, and it's like, all right, well, like I don't really want to receive an email about like if I based on my personal interests. I want to be in my day job, like I'm just trying to like reduce the amount of problems I have to solve, and if you can give me a service, me something that I want to buy, like I would be interested. In another context, you could think about like when you're on Instagram as like a B2B context or B2C context. If you get ads that are actually relevant, let's say you're like shopping for your wife on for Valentine's Day, and you find something that's like actually something you need, then actually it's actually a wow moment. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we're trying to do.
I think everybody knows like you've like the Instagram shoes or pants or whatever that you've bought, where it's like, wow, those look perfect. How'd they do that? Um, ads can feel good.
Yeah, and I think like for AI, I think like we're sorry within for like B2B, like the data is so asymmetric where I know nothing about what's going on with free play, you know nothing what's going on with Apollo, but I think AI does do a better job of like synthesizing this information. So going back to the example of like Smartling, they were able to like cut down like tens of hours of manual research where they would literally go to every website and they would try to find gaps in translation on their website. Like let's say they have an English and Spanish one, they would see if there's any English words on the Spanish website. And now with AI, you can actually discover that there are gaps in their website. And that kind of is an email that writes itself where you can say, like, we notice those gaps on your website from like, English to Spanish. And we have this solution that can like, reduce the time to fix this, like let's say like 20%, whatever it may be. And I do think that is valuable. And going back to the Instagram example, like if we can get closer to information symmetry, we can actually have more relevant outreach where you don't get all these crappy emails, but you actually have outreach that's relevant to you. But yeah.
Yep. No, that all resonates. And I mean, that's candidly like that's where we are and how we would use Apollo. It's like we're not trying to automate outbounding, but it's supplementing our sales team and helping find people we want to talk to. Right. So that's great. Cool. Well, thanks for the level set. Like, so I think, we'll get into some of the building topics. I think one of the things, like I mentioned, you're on the product side. Awesome. I think we're seeing a lot more people um, who are in product management roles getting deeper and deeper into the building side of AI. And that's one of the things that actually like first drew us together too. I think we connected online because you were hiring this sales background prompt engineering role, and we've published some content about similar roles. We've seen this like AI quality lead rise up with some of our customers. So I would love to just hear you start talk a little bit about, like, for people that are listening that are on the product side. I hear this all the time. My background's in product management too. People that are wanting to get into working on AI, like, what's your take? Like, what what does the life of an AI product lead look like? First of all, if you hear like a bit of the day of the life or a week in the life, then it would just be cool to talk a little bit about, like, what do PMs need to be thinking about these days.
Yeah, so I have like a I have a little bit of a hot take. I actually think like everyone thinks AI product management is sexy. I actually argue it's probably one of the more unsexy roles these days.
Nice. Tell us more.
And
Yeah.
so what I mean by that is like you actually will spend like, or at least in some portions, a majority of your time like just evaluating AI outputs. And it's like what I guess there's like the AI Evals. It's like a really
Yep.
popular skill that's coming up. But like for example, when we were building our AI Power Ups product, which is our research agent, I would spend at least like maybe 2 to 5 hours a week, literally just reviewing spreadsheets of what our machine learning team and prompt writers were basically writing. Where it's like, okay, here's a company, here's like the research we want to conduct to find pain points they're solving, and like, does this look good or not? And that doesn't work when you just do it on like one company. You need to do it on like you know 50 to 100 companies. And this is, remember, like the iteration
Or
cycle is
kinds of companies. Yeah. It's like they can't all be consumer product companies. They've got to be a mix of things.
exactly. And so like that's not a sexy thing to do. It's like you're basically have to, one, you have to create a golden data set, which is basically like examples of input output and like what you're trying to achieve. And so then your engineers or prompt writers can then have that to kind of build out, okay, like a test set as they kind of build out their LLM products to compare like the outputs to see if they're actually getting the ideal output.
Yeah.
And you also have to do like in the first version, I would do a lot of the human annotation myself, like spot checking or find the golden data set and stuff like that. And like that's like not fun work. I personally found that to be very interesting, but like for a lot of people, that's not a great part of the job. But that's becoming much more like incredibly important, as like shipping AI products is easy. Shipping high quality AI products is incredibly hard. Um, so that's like one thing. I'll pause there, but yeah, I can go a lot more.
I mean, it's interesting, right? I think, I've talked to a bunch of people about this topic. One of the things that I've heard people say is, you know, this is actually kind of fun, right? Getting into the weeds with the data, doing the kind of QA you're talking about, but also like making prompt engineering changes or recommending these things. Like suddenly people that haven't been working like in an IDE, pushing code, start to have more of a direct, visible impact on the product. Like, oh, that can be fun. People are getting energized about that. It also turns into a bunch of grunt work. I talk to people, especially at bigger companies, like the PM job has been just basically go to meetings for too long.
Mm.
I don't have enough time to get into that. Some places it's like it's too complicated, or like the engineers are responsible for that stuff, and I don't know. I'm just trusting them. So you seem like you've figured out. You're not just like doing some QA and some prompt engineering. You're talking about evals. Like, tell us more. Like, how did you get to that place where like you're pretty involved in the definition of like what the AI product experience looks like, or the generative AI product experience looks like, at least?
Yeah, I mean, I think as like I mean, quality is like the number one thing you can deliver as like an AI PM. I mean, UX is also important, but quality is definitely number one. So I would argue like if you're not getting involved in that process as a PM, it's going to be very hard for you to have a highly retentive AI product. In terms of like how I got into it, is like simply at the time when we're building it, it's like many people when you first start, like you ship on vibes, then you're like, this doesn't look very good. And then from there, you kind of say, okay, we need to like build a process around this. So at Apollo, we basically had we started building a process where we had spreadsheets and I would review every output on like four criteria. So one was accuracy, one was relevance and clarity and tone, and I would just give it a score of like 1 to 3 for each of them. And ideally, the average for each of them is above 2.5, and then we would ship it. The reason that we got to that with the AI Powers product is a lot of people wanted to have kind of out of the like just connecting like our data to a LM is not good enough. People want to have examples and like be able to like assist them in writing prompts, and without like understanding fundamentally how that works, as like a PM or AI product builder, it's really difficult for you to be able to do that. And I think secondly, from a user perspective, like user understanding perspective, like you need to be the one that's like at least being really close to building out the golden data set and the evals, because you also need to understand what people actually want, not just from like a, in SaaS 1.0, like a UX and like a functionality perspective, but like from a quality perspective, like what do they actually expect to receive? And I think that's something that I really learned to like building AI at Apollo versus like, when I was my founder before building my own AI product. Like it's very different when you have a lot of people relying on this product. It needs to be high quality.
There's something embedded in there, which is like, you're doing that role. Traditionally, engineers have been responsible for testing and quality. I think we do encounter like tons of companies that are building in this space, and there is a real bifurcation. There's places where engineering is really leading, and there's places where product's leading. And in my experience, it tends to be like the more generalized the use case, the more it's like a consumer chatbot or a
Sure.
generalized writing tool. Like engineering might be leading. The more you're getting into a niche, like sales, right? The more it's like the subject matter expert gets involved. And you have this role, right? So it's not just you. You also have, like I mentioned before, this prompt engineer role. Tell us more about that, and like where did that come from? What's that person doing? What's different between their job and yours? Be curious to hear more about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one thing I'll say though, what you just said, I think it can be PM led, but I actually think it should be like expert led. So even the PMs aren't experts. I'm not going to say I'm the expert in outbound. So I definitely think like people have hard won learnings using the manual like way of doing it are really important to be included in the process, which we can talk about a bit later. But in terms of like, okay, so for the prompt writer, essentially what happened is our machine learning. So we have a team of like machine learning engineers at Apollo, and they were writing out prompts for us, but they're not really the best suited to write out prompts because like as a machine learning engineer your skill set is more aligned with either traditional machine learning models like training a model and a data set, or kind of more complicated agentic workflows that require a deeper understanding of how our systems and APIs work, because you're trying to execute action in the product, which is very different than like an LLM call and returning a textual response. For a textual response, or like kind of like the traditional LLM response, we basically kind of discovered that like we felt like it would be a better idea for us to hire a prompt writer on our team. So our first prompt writer in Apollo, that kind of had experience as a domain expert and had interest in also kind of leaning into product strategy. And the really critical thing is like domain experts should write prompts, not the other way. Like prompt writers should then learn the domain, because it's very difficult to embed best practices if you haven't learned that before. So that's kind of the strategy we took. So we hired a prompt writer, Tony. He's just quick shot. He's incredible. He's listening. Yeah. And yeah, I can go deeper into like how we went through the process. But yeah, I'm curious what you wanted to dive into.
I mean, lots of things, right? I think one of the biggest topics I think we're running into, like, you know, let's call it roughly 2 years into the generative AI hype cycle. Early on, a lot of teams just like build a quick prototype as an engineering team, whoever was around, maybe put a Tiger team on something in generative AI. Fast forward now, like a lot of the more established companies that we talk to, it's like kind of a bunch of feature teams in the company, or maybe everybody are doing something with generative AI. It's very distributed. There's not just like one team responsible. And like we're seeing more and more of this trend toward like, okay, it's not just engineers doing all the work. But then there are these questions come up, how do you teach somebody prompt engineering? There is a contract when you're writing production software where it's like that prompt's actually got to work, maybe not just the quality of the content that comes out, but like there's going to be a structured JSON object. It can't break. It's got to work with, whatever code's being used to parse it. The more you get into agents and tool calling, the more there's like a tighter contract with the code.
Mhm.
Curious, like, maybe a couple things are in there. To start with, maybe like, what does it look like? You made this comment, like you can teach an expert prompt engineering. What are the bounds? Like you mentioned curating golden sets, you mentioned like writing evals, like what is in scope that you're like Tony's learned to do, you're teaching other people in this role to do. Maybe start there, and then we can talk about like, also curious, how do they work with engineers?
Yeah. Okay. So I think I mean, domain expert, I think prompt writing is getting easier and easier over time as well as the models improve. So like then I guess like whatever remains is really the business or domain expertise. That's like a general high level point. But in terms of like how our prompt writer works is essentially we'll have for all the different AI products I mentioned, a lot of them have prompts that either we expose user or we don't that need to be kind of built out by our prompt writer team. And essentially we'll just have a set of requests, a use case. Ideally we'll label out, okay, like what is like the manual workflow that they like the user would do. So like an example could be for our reveal pain points template we have in Apollo. It could be like, okay, I'm gonna go look at like 10Ks of their public company, see what their CEO is posting about, what job postings they have that like kind of indicate some pain that they're experiencing, as well as customer reviews. So you kind of
Yep.
like label out like the manual workflow, and the job as the prompt writers, they probably already know that workflow very well. And then their job is then break it down to like what are the steps I want to like use an LM for. So like what data do I need at each step? How would like the workflow work? So we have like multiple steps, LM calls to like, maybe gather some context. And then from there, what are the steps AI should take to like, analyze, can like go through those different sources to find pain points? And then what is the output you want? And so that's all, but you can build that all like, with either within, your own preferred LM of choice, or obviously for us, we just use like the Apollo instance because we already have that up and running.
Sure.
And then in terms of how they work with engineering, so the engineer is still like we'll still like QA and make sure that it works in production, and then be also like submit the prompts to production. So we don't really have our prompt writers yet like shipping code to production, but like for the once the prompt is ready and like the format is aligned on and all the data is correct, then we could just pass it off to engineering to ship. So that's kind of the general process of how it works with engineering. But the prompt writer is like basically just a new role within the product team. So like they're working not only with engineers, also with design to think through, okay, like, I mentioned what data we need, like, okay, what data should we gather or like automatically capture, as well as with research to understand like how users want to receive information. And then with
Yep.
product to like prioritize like what use cases we want to go after and stuff like that. Yeah.
Cool. And so they're playing a role in all that. They're not just isolated to bringing the domain expertise to the table. They're thinking about product strategy, which is awesome. And just, I think a lot of people are curious, like, what's this look like? You mentioned earlier some of the things that you did initially, like building out golden sets. You mentioned evals, like you mentioned clarity and tone and other things. How do those come to life? Who's figuring out what those should be?
Do you mean the criteria?
Yeah, the criteria, like you had to make a decision. Those are things you cared about. Um,
Yeah. I think in general, like, we, my researcher and we kind of define like an AI constitution, and at least for like our case, for sales use case. Like, I think most places accuracy will be important. Relevance is extremely important because you want to be relevant to their business. And
yeah,
then clarity is more about like the response is typically verbose. You want to make sure it's like easy to understand. And then tone is really important for sales, specifically for like the outbound email use case, like you mentioned. You want to have like a tone that's conversational and concise, because it's like someone's day job is not to read outbound cold emails.
yeah,
So that's kind of like how we came up with that criteria. In terms of like how, like, I guess the evaluation of the criteria has changed. So originally I was doing most of the annotation, but now we have like a team of like sales reps inside of Apollo that kind of go and annotate it themselves. So they actually going to kind of act as like the best possible user of the product, and they're able to give feedback on like what they would expect to see, and then what we deliver on. And that's been really helpful for us to really align with like kind of like the expert user, so we can give that to all of our users. So that's kind of the approach that we take in.
yeah. Have you built like a dog food version of Apollo where they can give feedback in that while they're using it? Is that something different from what the normal user sees?
No, they did this. No, we don't have unfortunately, we don't have a dog free version. Just they can either use our instance, or we have like for a lot of our annotation, it's still done within like a spreadsheet.
No, that's cool. Great. So I think you're giving us a good sense of like team, this role, what's different. Um, what else? I think if you're just thinking there's interested product people listening to this, there's engineering leaders listening that are thinking about, okay, what role should my PMs play? Maybe like to put a bookend on this section, we can move on to some other stuff. But what else do you think like an AI PM should be focused on, should be investing in? Anything that you're like, this is negative signal, like you should avoid that, too much hype or something over there? Like, what advice would you have to people thinking about what this role should be doing?
Yeah. So I think for AI PM, yeah, like I mean, I'll just exclude all like the traditional PM stuff because that's all the
Still apply.
case. Yeah, still applies. I think the other thing would be like, okay, like I think everyone defaults to AI as a solution, but that's not really the right way to think about it. So like the role of an AI PM is also to have like a framework around when I shouldn't use AI, and like for my given product. And then the final one is like for UX design. The AI PM should be very conscious not only of like simple, easy to use, but also like okay, does the user have like a clear view and like can they check the outputs of the AI? So like the like kind of transparency. Is it like contextual within their workflow, or it just feels like they're getting their job done faster? And so that's kind of like the three areas, like AI evals, UX, and then deciding if something should be AI or not. That are kind of unique to the AI PM.
And like, you've done this work for a while. You mentioned like you were a founder at an AI company before you joined Apollo. You've been working on this for a while now at Apollo. For a lot, I mean, most people were not AI product managers 2 years ago, right? Most
Yeah.
people still aren't. Um, any other advice on just like how to ramp? Some of the things that you're talking about doing, they're good principles, good in theory. If they're not familiar yet, any tips on like how people can ramp up in this area and build some of these skills?
Yeah, I think I mean generally like just learn by doing. But I think like in general, like what I would say is first identify a problem or that you could potentially solve with AI. So an example could be like okay, like we have a engagement tool on Apollo, and then like the question or in your case you could think about okay, we have this problem or this tool that we have today that's very manual, and then you could ask yourself okay, like do I have data that I can use. In our case, for sequencing, we have a bunch of data like email and like open rates and reply rates and stuff like that. And then do I have like high quality data that I can use to inform like a system that I could build around AI? And then do I have like a rules based system that I can replace? So like in one example could be sequencing where it's like, okay, we have this like, rules based system where we decide, okay, step one, send the email, step two. Theoretically, we could build a system where it could decide when to send emails based off of kind of like using the data from the rules based system to build like ML system for. And the same thing with AI too. It's like thinking through like what's a highly manual workflow right now. Like for example, like account customer account contact research, and then like how can I automate that with AI? So I think like thinking like first like picking the right problem to solve for AI to start like inside of your own. If you're just a regular PM, I'm sure there's plenty of areas where you could migrate from SaaS to like an AI native solution, and then start with a really small MVP, and then really just try to learn like ins and out of like prompt writing, quality, QA, and stuff like that by yourself, and try to get like a high quality product. That alone, that feedback loop will at least give you the experience to say, you know what, I built an AI product that's been successful, whether it's a feature or kind of like the first piece I would recommend. The second part is just like simply like immerse yourself in AI every day. Like every single thing that you do, try to use AI for it.
That's a big one. I feel like,
Yeah,
just foundational, good advice. Big plus one to that.
totally. Like be your best user. And then just like learn what user your users want, right? Like when you open up a natural language interface, you'd be really surprised what you learn. It's like imagine if you had access to like the Google search engine queries of like everyone in Colorado. It'd be kind of interesting, right? You could do a lot of interesting, interesting things with all that data. And you have that similar thing too now in your own product. So yeah.
That's cool. One of the things you've talked about that I think, you gave some good answers on is like, what have you done to get to high quality AI products? I think a lot of people have been struggling with, you know, too many stories about people that are building prototypes that don't get to production, people that are shipping products that aren't that compelling. Like you all are out, in a group that have been making it work. Get good advice around bringing in domain experts and everything else. What's been like really hard or, harder than expected, that, maybe even a failure, whatever you're willing to share. But, you know, other than the rosy stories and the good stuff you're doing, love to hear you talk about just like what you've had to work through and you've had to like, troubleshoot in a difficult way.
Totally. Yeah. So I can give like one like pretty clear example. So when we were building out our AI power ups or research agent, originally I thought that like everyone wants to spend a lot of time prompting and like, kind of manipulating Apollo data and like, what public web data for like all their use cases. And like, so we launched that product where you basically like, oh, and I actually presented an event in Colorado. I think that you hosted. And I thought, this is like God's greatest gift on earth. I was like, wow, like this is a great product. Everyone's going to use it. We're open prompting. People are going to like be so creative and whatever. And I think what we like quickly realized, like we got to like 1,000 users, but it was just flat for like a month. And it was just like literally nothing was working. And a lot of people were churning because the reality is like most people like don't want to learn the ins and outs of AI. They just want to get their job done faster. And I
Totally.
do feel like as a product builder, we always think, oh, like technology, I love technology. I want to build this AI thing, give it to the world. Everyone's going to love it. And like it doesn't work that way. And that also is a similar case when I was a founder and I built my own AI product. It was like a Jira automation tool where you could basically, say, okay, here are the tickets I want to write for this project. And they could generate all your Jira tickets and then output into your Jira. Most people like don't want to do that because it's not like contextual in the workflow. It gets some job done faster. They have to use a new tool and all that stuff. So I think like realizing that like while a lot of like tech is into AI, the world is still not into
Yep.
AI. And like the only way for mass adoption is to just simplify their workflow with AI working like magically in the background. That's what I truly believe. Um, and that's something that we experienced at Power Ups where we said, okay, well, if no one wants to write prompts, like, should we just pivot to explain your own words and like we'll do all the work in the background to solve this? And we did do that. And it took some time to get to high quality results. And that allowed us to like triple our WAUs just due to that one change. So I think like the hard part of AI, building an AI is like thinking it's really easy to ship something, but it's like I said, really hard to build a high quality product. But at the same time, it's hard to build a product that's easy to use. And that's something that like you really have to invest in. That was a big challenge for us and kind of initial like, you know, not a rosy picture for that product as we first launched it.
Interesting. So yeah, you all went down that path and have decided against trying to teach all your customers to prompt engineer themselves.
Exactly. Because we thought everyone wanted that flexibility, but turns out no one does.
Yeah, probably good learning for the people that are listening. Tell us a little bit about where this is all going. I think you and I have had some conversations separately. I know you've talked about a little bit at the beginning, how it was more like kind of one-off embedded features. Now you're trying to pull things together, but be great to just hear like, what are you excited about? What's 2025 going to hold? What changes in terms of how you're building and what you're building and what it does for your customers?
Yeah, so I think I mean on like the end user side, my secret hope is that we can operate more like you get emails or LinkedIn messages that are really relevant to you. If the person who's using Apollo, it's similar to like you're on Instagram and you see an ad that's relevant to you, like you're shopping for Valentine's Day. That's my hope from a user perspective.
It's good.
From a customer perspective, inside Apollo, what really intrigues me is like I guess really like I guess like three things. So one is the building kind of like a horizontal assistant on Apollo that can operate as more like your teammate, and it can basically use all of our end-to-end functionality. So you don't need to learn how to like find leads or create a sequence or prepare for a meeting. You can kind of just work with us in natural language to be able to kind of get your go-to-market job to be done, or whatever it may be. And
Mhm.
then we can just kind of do that work for you like side by side with you. And you ever want to switch out to our product, you can. And I think that is really interesting. Like kind of a horizontal assistant.
Can
I
I ask
think
you a question
secondly,
about that?
sorry, yeah. Yeah.
Like the way that you just described things a couple minutes ago, you were kind of saying like we're trying not to teach our customers to be prompt engineers, and the way you were telling the story, it was kind of like, hey, it's not like every product just needs a chat box in it. And then you're also talking about this like more horizontal assistant, natural language interface. Like, explain the nuance a little bit. How do you see what you're describing as different from like what came before? How's it going to feel easier for a customer? To
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the problem I was describing is more with like open prompting. So writing like a full prompt. And then the next version of that was like you just say what you want, for example, for a research task, and then we'll execute it. But now the question is like, okay, when I come into Apollo or any product, I'm not just necessarily trying to do one thing. I'm not just trying to like just research to find someone that has a translation gap in their website.
Yeah.
Actually, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find PMs that have localization experience and they're currently trying to, let's say, stand up a website or they're the website owner right now, and we notice a translation gap. So our users have actually come into our existing AI Pirates product and have these really complicated queries that we can't deliver on because it only can do one thing, which is add a column, could gather information from the web and pull it into that column
Yep.
for a given contact or account. So the argument I'm trying to make is that we actually will make it even easier because we'll even extract that complexity. So you don't have to learn that individual tool. You can just work with our assistant to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's like reducing the learning curve of the Apollo platform and kind of giving you access to all of our advanced functionalities without having to do it yourself. That's what excites me. So it's a little bit, I guess it's more flexibility in the sense that you can access more of our platform, but it's still inherently a simpler product because you're used to have a job to be done and we'll just execute it on it for you or with you, I should say.
Yeah, that's cool. No, it's a good distinction. And I think it really relates to a lot of people that are thinking about just like AI product design too. Like you're covering a lot of topics here that are there's a nuance. How do you make this really simple but still benefit from natural language? That's cool. I know that like we're going to be running short on time. You're going to tell us the number two. You gave us
Oh,
one you're excited about. I wanted to let you finish.
yeah.
Is on the excited for 2025.
I would say, well, one more thing about natural language. I would be scared to open the natural language inbox in your product. The reason why is because the assumption now is you can do anything within it. And it is very surprising. Like we have this like a prompt factory where I basically see all the prompts that people write. And then we kind of like it's obviously anonymized, but we can basically see kind of what people are asking. And you'd be surprised like the crazy amount of things people want to do. And so you have to be really prepared for all of the edge cases. That's always why it's better to build up to this versus just going straight to the end. So just something to keep in mind.
That's
But
good.
the other two
It's good to learn
vectors,
how people are going to
yeah,
do with the product too.
yeah, true. I mean, that's like it's like gold mine, right? It's like imagine the days of Google search where you could gather all the queries and optimize their search engine. Now you basically have that for any product, not just for these like few consumer products. So it is very, very valuable information, and honestly, a source of a gold mine of insights you can really mine for your product to build what your customers actually want, not just what you think they want, and you get it in real time. Anyways,
Cool.
yeah, for the other two, the one thing is like, okay, so last year was the year of like, building LLMs into your product. I think this year is like, yeah, agents is one, but I actually think the more important investment area is like building context. And I think like Anthropic Cloud Projects has done a really good job of this. I use it all the time, where
Mm.
you basically have like a knowledge base and then custom instructions. And you'd send your AI always knows you when you're coming in. I do think with like Apollo, we have, and I think as any product, if you have user data coming in, you do have a unique position where the context layer cannot really be solved by these large LM companies. Yeah, they're building the model context protocol by Anthropic.
Mhm.
But for like delivering on highly relevant AI is still in the world of individual products. And I think context and relevance are an area where you can really succeed in. And that's what I'm really excited about for Apollo and what we're building to kind of build like a context layer
Like a
on Apollo.
personalized context layer about what are you trying to get done in Apollo.
Exactly. And I think that could be applied to any product if you have user data coming in, like that is your edge. And then finally just continuing on like the quality path and really kind of exploring the edges of like, human as well as AI led annotation. We're using AI, even AI to correct other AI. That really fascinates me, which is kind of a fun area to build in.
We know that world. Well, I know we're going to run out of time. Thank you for taking us through the tour, talking about what you're building. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. Any other final word of advice or parting wisdom for people that are listening and trying to build a really great AI product?
Yeah, I think I guess like maybe like two other things is one is like one thing that really worked well for us is like do like everyone has assumptions about like what model is best and like what the market tells you. And that is actually a critical piece as a product builder, deciding what models to use. So I do think it's really important to do like blind testing of models where like you have a use case, and for example, where our email use case, we wanted to test like Anthropic. The common idea is Anthropic Sonnet or Claude Sonnet 3.5 was going to be the best for copywriting. However, in our use case, it actually turns out that we tested OpenAI for a mini, Anthropic Claude Sonnet 3.5, as well as Haiku 3.5 and Sonnet 3.7 recently. And what
Yep.
we still found is the cheapest Claude model is actually the best for us for copywriting at the cheapest price point. So I do think it's important to explore like models with like blindly to see what actually works for you versus just like automatically going to OpenAI or something like that. And I think secondly is in UX is try to build trust mechanisms into UX. You need to earn the right to automate. It's not the other way around. You don't automate and then people just love you. Is you need to like people always want manual review. So you should build that like as first principle in any product that you create.
That's awesome. This is all practical stuff and exactly the kind of things I think our audience are looking for. So thanks for taking the time. Thanks for sharing things you've learned. Everybody go check out apollo.io, see what Tyler's up to. And Tyler, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. See ya.
All right. That's all we have for today's episode of Deployed, the AI Product Podcast. I'm Ian Cairns, CEO and co-founder of FreePlay. I hope you enjoyed listening. And if you did, we'd love to hear about it. Your reviews mean a lot. They help other listeners. So give us a like, share, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this. And if something stood out to you in the episode, or if you've got feedback or ideas for a future episode, or if you simply just want to learn more or up to at FreePlay, shoot me a note. I'm Ian at freeplay.ai. You can also find me on Twitter at Cairns. Thanks so much for listening.